This is episode 403 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, for a administration, and I'm talking about the Biden administration now, that purports to care a great deal about the rising price at the pump and, generally speaking, the economy. They sure do like to cancel oil and gas leases. And last week, the Biden, and I always like to make sure that people are aware of the Deb Haaland, former congresswoman and radical environmental activist. She is really calling the shots here, arguably. She's the head of the Interior Department, one of the biggest and most powerful departments in Washington, D.C., in the administration, that they canceled some additional leases in the Gulf of Mexico and in Alaska. Obviously, this comes on top of, if you listen to the podcast on a regular basis, as I know you all do, leases that were canceled, reduced by 80% here in New Mexico, and royalty payments that were increased by 50%. That was just a few weeks ago. So, funny way to express a desire to reduce gas prices.
Yeah, their actions don't match the rhetoric. Is that even possible?
Shocking.
Yeah, and the other thing that we'll hear soon, if we haven't already, is this won't make any difference in the short term. You know, it's like this is now in the case of Alaska, they'd always talked about Anwar. It would take a decade to open that up for it to have an impact. But the key is that new leases on federal land in New Mexico, in particular, could have an impact in just a few months. So we'll see what happens here. But there's this belief that we can do without oil and gas very soon, and we're seeing maybe what some of that impact is. Keep in mind also that. There are other producers of oil in the world, including the OPEC cartel as well as Russia, and they have an optimum price. All things being equal, they'd rather produce a little bit less and have the price quite a bit higher than produce a little bit more and have the price go down. So I think they're pleased with the U.S. policy, frankly, and hope it would be sustained and not be subject to more market challenge and market priced oil as opposed to cartel priced oil.
Yeah, and one of my not necessarily favorite economists, although I think he does get a bad rap among the more conservative economic community, John Maynard Keynes, his Keynesian economic theory, very unfortunate, but he did have a lot of good things to say about the economy. One of his famous quotes was, "In the long run, we're all dead." And that seems to be very relevant today, yes.
And in the short run, we may be all bankrupt in terms of if energy prices continue to go up, because it's a huge driver of inflation. We are in a world economy, and freight and all products move predominantly by oil and in the form of diesel and airline fuel and the like, and so there's very little that doesn't happen economically in the world and in the United States without some sort of oil product being involved.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the latest, I believe this was from Gas Buddy, one of the notable scientists of the gas price world. They said that prices in the U.S. have reached an all-time high as of, I believe, yesterday, so Monday, May the 16th, $4.48 per gallon national average. And if you drive by your local gas station, you'll see not only those increasing prices, you'll see diesel prices quite elevated as well, quite maybe $1, even $2 above the price of regular gasoline. And the prediction from GasBuddy.com was that by the end of this week, that average could be $5 per gallon nationwide. So any chance of reducing prices seems to be quickly slipping through this administration's fingers. And it really, we mostly talk about the policy here, Wally, but boy, this is not something that if you are the Biden administration, that you're looking at the future in November, you've got to know that this is going to be the death knell for their Senate and probably House majorities, unless the Republicans really screw things up or we're seeing some kind of political action out there under the surface that most people are missing. Everybody's expecting a pretty significant wave. And whether that filters in what ways down to New Mexico, certainly congressional races, obviously gubernatorial race as well, very potentially impactful. But it's not good news politically either, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I agree. It is certainly bad news politically. And then just another economic concept to throw out there, Paul, this is my Economics 101. Price elasticity, which just means if the price of something goes up, how much does demand go down? And when it comes to like diesel fuel, for example, or fuel to power intercontinental shipping, it's one of those things. I don't think the demand goes down tremendously when the price goes up. It just throws it into the price of goods because people still do desire goods. So that's one of the things we're talking about. And I don't know, have they said it yet? Well, these oil prices don't have anything to do with inflation. Nothing has anything to do with inflation. And if everything that was discredited, quote unquote, by the administration and those that are talking about it didn't have anything to do with inflation, we wouldn't have inflation. So something has to be causing it.
Well, I believe Putin's price hike was the first foray into trying to explain it. Price gouging with the oil and gas companies. And I know we're both old enough to remember April of 2020 when those poor oil and gas companies weren't doing a lot of price gouging back then. But it is pretty straightforward and simple. Yes, there are probably extraneous causes that may be resulting in higher gas prices organically, but it's hard to separate those. And right or wrong, the average person doesn't necessarily see the nuanced political arguments when they go to the polls. They say, is my life getting better? Am I able to buy more stuff? Am I able to live a better life with my family? Or am I paying outrageous prices at the pump? And again, the Biden administration's mostly at this point done the whole blame game. I saw an article about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Of course, that's been their one attempt. Talk about an epic fail. The release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserves has not worked, and I believe the story was that they've hit their lowest level in decades. Because of course the Biden administration's released a lot of the oil that was held in those reserves, rightly or wrongly. It's not really. I'm probably in the camp of just get rid of them all as a general rule, and get politicians out of trying to manage oil and gas prices. Let the market. But of course, when the federal government owns and manages so much of our oil and gas supply, as they do right here in New Mexico, they are inherently in the oil and gas biz, and that's a separate issue.
Yeah, in the strategic oil reserve, the clue, Paul, is in the word strategic. They're using it as a tactical price driving thing. It ostensibly was designed to provide some level of oil supply in the case of some sort of war or national emergency, and it got a lot of attention back in the 70s when we had the oil price and the Arab oil embargo and a lot of things going on. But, you know, releasing oil from the strategic oil reserve always it's a gesture. It's never really shown to be very effective in doing anything. It reminds me a lot of back again in the 70s and 80s when politicians wanted to show that they cared but didn't want to do anything. They would form blue ribbon commissions to study this. So I think a blue ribbon commission would do just as much as these releases from the strategic oil reserve. If they want to do something price wise, maybe make it easier to produce domestically, might do something, I think, in the shorter term than any of these other things that are talked about. But we'll have to wait and see. At some level, demand will go down slowly, but in the short term, again, I'm not sure. I think get ready for prices to be high for quite a while. Although I will say, Paul, and I've said it before, remember when I said when oil was negative, the spot price, I said it will come back. And I will tell you that oil prices and gasoline prices will not be as high as they are forever. At some point, they will come down. It's a very cyclical commodity that has had ups and downs many, many times in the last 100 years, and those will continue to happen. It's just a question of how long it will take for that to occur. I will say one thing: worldwide recession tends to reduce the oil price, and that's certainly on the table right now.
That's true. So, yeah. I would say that the federal side, the control that the government has over oil and gas, typically, you would expect for those political reasons, if not economic, for there to be a little more opening. That is one thing that we're seeing not happen this particular time around. So that would lead me to believe that there will be a longer period of elevated prices for that reason alone. But again, we shall see. There's a lot of other potential factors: foreign policy, the Saudis versus the Iranians, and Iranian deal, and the Saudis are not thrilled with that. So there's other factors at play. The Saudis could clearly play a role in oil prices, but we'll leave it there. We're focusing here domestically and in the United States directly. And it is a energy intensive show, however, a lot of energy things happening. And the latest in energy news is that the Energy Transition Act, it's been over 3 years since they passed it. I think it's already safe to say that this thing is a dud. And the news just keeps getting worse. And, when I talk about government policy gone awry, the rail runner, it's killed a few people, but mostly on the tracks and that kind of thing. Nobody's really lost their lives at the rail runner failure.
No one's lost their life at the spaceport because nothing ever happens at the spaceport.
ART definitely killed some businesses along Central here in Albuquerque. And we've said, not just before these projects were pushed, but after, these are bad ideas, and ultimately, I told you so. Now, if the lights don't come on when people flip their switches here now we're probably pushing that back to the summer of 2023, there could be serious issues in terms of people dying due to lack of electricity availability, heat, obviously an issue, but all kinds of life-saving, life-sustaining things that we consider pretty fail-safe in our own homes require steady electricity. And the latest comes out of the essential failure of the solar market. And P&M just noted that they would have half the replacement solar power and battery storage for the summer of 2023 that they had been expecting. That is huge because we're on this path now as we hit summertime where the San Juan Generating Station has been kept open for an extra 3 months, ostensibly to get us through the summer, but definitely also partially to get the governor through this summer and get her through her reelection bid without rolling blackouts happening. But 2023, and we've said it, and we talked about it last week because we're ahead of the curve here at the Rio Grande Foundation, always predicting the next policy failure. And this whole debacle with solar policy and tariffs, not really something we care a lot about. But to quickly summarize, there's supply chain issues relating to COVID. We get most of our solar panels out of the Far East and China and some of these countries that have very low labor costs and very suspect environmental regulations. Right. But the fact is that our supply chain is highly reliant on a foreign low-cost model. Good, bad, indifferent, that is reality. Well, that's why they've been caught up in a anti-dumping lawsuit with an American solar panel company bringing suit, and both Biden and Trump levying tariffs against the producers that have come to the United States to reduce prices and find new market share. Okay, whether you think that's good policy or bad policy, it is a fact that the price of solar panels has dropped largely as a result of using these cheaper foreign competitors, and that administrations of both parties have expressed concern about that. So that's where we are, and PNM says, you know, guys, next summer we're going to have less than half of the solar panel driven, technology driven power that we expected we were going to have. So fun times ahead, Wally.
Yes, absolutely. Fun times are ahead. And Paul, one of the things that I think is underreported, just because it's a level beneath, these solar panel projects, are the fact that surrounding states all have less available wholesale power. It's one of those, when you look at the grid, if you're having a little trouble in your state, odds are another state would have some excess power. Well, California, home of Energy Transition Act 1, I'll call New Mexico Energy Transition Act 2. But Gavin Newsom's considering keeping Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Station open this summer longer because they're having the same sort of issues in California. And so that right there speaks to just potential widespread grid instability that bad things could happen in other states that also could impact New Mexico. So yeah, we're in a bit of a precarious situation right now, to put it mildly.
Yeah, and we're not saying that things couldn't go sideways, so to speak, this summer with the San Juan Generating Station aging, being phased out. That is a hard stop in late September. It's not coming back, at least not in its current form. And by the way, not that we didn't already know this, but a useful nugget. Representative Day Hockman Vigil in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday, she wrote an op-ed about the solar panel investigation casting a cloud over New Mexico, and goes into some of this. Of course, she was a supporter of the Energy Transition Act, and she supports the whole array of the so-called green agenda. But there has been some pushback when I've stated that the Energy Transition Act was directly passed in part to close San Juan Generating Station. Mm-hmm. So the very first paragraph of State Representative Day Hockman Vigil's article, in 2019, I voted for the Energy Transition Act, which will eventually lead to the closing of the coal-fired San Juan Generating Station to advance New Mexico's green energy goals. So there it is in black and white, a strong supporter and somebody in the know when it comes to this policy, specifically voting for legislation because it would lead to the closure of the San Juan Generating Station.
Yeah, and then, Paul, PNM was a huge supporter of the Energy Transition Act. So there was no fight, there, quite the contrary. There's a lot of indication that maybe they were a little too involved in the specifics of that, but they were there all the way. PNM wanted to get out of all coal and all nuclear ASAP, and the Energy Transition Act was a a medium for them to do that. Since that happened, we came to find out that there was the Avangrid merger, and Avangrid has a stated policy that they don't have those generation sources in their mix. So yeah, a lot of things. It wasn't like a lot of people didn't want this to happen. So,
and one final note, which kind of, I think the situation in China is affecting things, but just in general. When there is increased demand, and in the case of a lot of renewable power sources, wind and solar particularly, the demand is largely driven by government policy, subsidies and various incentives and mandates requiring the use of wind and solar. I found articles and a chart talking about how the price of these so-called renewables is on the increase. And I found a chart from Inside Climate News, and it shows that while in 2018, this is late in the year 2018, solar was below $30 a megawatt hour, it has risen up to $34.25 per megawatt hour at the end of 2021. Wind prices, which solar and the whole supply chain issue in China, that totally makes sense, but actually that's the least increase. The wind has increased far more dramatically from the mid 20s, below $25 per megawatt hour to over $38 per megawatt hour on the wind side. And I am not well enough versed in all the environmental ins and outs. Maybe you have some insider information there as to why this price increase, fairly dramatic price increase, is happening, but it's happening. And again, it further undermines, not that we fell for it to begin with, but the concept, the idea that somehow these renewables were going to reduce energy costs.
Yeah, and then Paul, to add to what you're saying, yeah, these prices are when these resources are available and running. And we all know that wind is highly intermittent, and solar, by its very nature, without batteries, is kind of a middle of the day into the late afternoon resource, and then it is no more. And so, it's one of those things. These prices, they have a little asterisk relative to other sources of generation like nuclear, natural gas, coal, hydro, which are much more predictable and can run pretty much 24/7 when things are going all right.
Yeah, now it's not all doom and gloom, because the reality is that, and new data from the Energy Administration,
Yeah, EIA, Energy
Information, those people.
Yeah, no,
yes.
it's all right.
The federal government says that indeed CO2 emissions continue to drop by and large. Certainly between 2020 and 2021, they went up, but the article and the chart clearly show that this is new data. We knew that, at the beginning of the year that we were expecting an uptick in CO2 emissions. This is kind of the inverse, if you will, of Biden claiming all these jobs and job growth during his administration. Well, yeah, when you're in a pandemic, and especially blue states have shut down, you're going to see some job growth. Well, record job growth. Thanks, Joe. Between 2020 and 2021, we saw an increase of CO2 emissions from 4.6 to 4.9 billion metric tons. Biden oversaw the largest increase in decades in terms of CO2 emissions. Thanks, Joe. Again, 2007's peak, however, we are at 6.06 billion metric tons. So we've seen a 18+% decline in carbon emissions between 2007 and 2021. President Obama credited, as he is correct in saying, fracking and natural gas replacing coal-fired power plants. That was what was driving the reduction in U.S. CO2 emissions. But I expect we'll see a return to ongoing declines in annual CO2 emissions. If you are passionate about that, don't like it or are agnostic, the fact remains that we are, as a country, becoming more and more efficient, and coal-powered plants, the traditional kinds, with their relatively elevated CO2 emissions, are going out of style, being replaced by natural gas, et cetera. Now, obviously, we'd like to see nuclear come in, and that would be steady, reliable power, but that's not on the agenda just yet. As you mentioned, California is still debating whether to phase out, to mothball a perfectly viable nuclear power plant. And they certainly need it because I think a lot of the power that they expect will be generated will simply not be there.
Yeah, and as I've said a couple times before, nuclear, you have the California approach to get it closed down early, but there are many nuclear power plants that are getting very close to their extended life cycle, not just their initial plan, but they got longer permits from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to continue to operate. And over the next decade and a little more, a lot of plants are going to be closing down on the nuclear side. So that's just something else in this broad mix. And the key is from an energy point of view, producing energy. We can certainly do that with wind and solar, but having the power, meaning the energy at the right time to use for what we need it for, that's good. That is the big challenge. So,
yeah, and in a bit of good news, bad news situation, obviously it's bad news that the Hermits Peak Canyon fire, which was started mostly, maybe there were, it's a merger of two fires. It was started, at least the most prominent component of it, by a so-called control burn by the federal government, the Forest Service. That is now the largest fire in state history. The wildfire is surpassing the 2012 Whitewater Baldy fire. So we're right on the precipice of 300,000 acres. I guess the good news is that there was video footage confirmed of rain falling, at least in parts of Las Vegas yesterday.
Fantastic.
But I don't know if it fell on the fire itself and how much of an impact, if any, it had. Certainly, we would like to see those fires reduced and ultimately contained and put out. But that is definitely a tragic situation, ongoing, and I do think that the contribution to the policy conversation that we can have is to continue to highlight ways in which people have noted the failure of the federal government to mitigate against fire risk. Now, there was an article in the newspaper, again on Sunday, from an activist talking about how the federal government doesn't do a good job managing the lands. It's a systematic problem. This is not it's just a prioritization or lack thereof of federal government dollars and federal resources in managing our forests. And it's not going to change. You'll have administrations come and go, and maybe Trump did some things better than the Biden or Obama administrations, but the systematic challenge is that the federal government does not do a good job of managing our forests, and it needs to change. Clifford Nichols, an attorney from California, in a July 17th, 2016 article, was prescient when he wrote, "The feds have failed to mitigate fire risks." He noted that he was the attorney for Otero County, that they passed a bill in 2001, Senate Bill 1, that essentially allowed local governments, it gave Otero County in particular the ability to thin and manage forest lands that they asserted, rightly I believe, were not being managed effectively by the federal government. And so there's a debate over whether this agency out of Washington, D.C., managing these lands should be the only ones able to manage them, or whether local interests, including Otero County and others, should be able to manage them. And In this op-ed, Nichols writes, in short, if the federal government fails to prevent wildfires that threaten the lives and property of people in New Mexico, they should at least allow New Mexico the right to take the actions necessary to do so. And he complains in this article that this legislation was passed in 2001. 15 years later, in 2016, as he writes this piece, nothing was done by the federal government. And, here we are 6 years later after this article, dealing with the record-breaking fire in New Mexico. So it is something that the Rio Grande Foundation has worked on, Representative Yvette Harrell worked on, and it definitely needs work because we are going to continue to suffer the consequences of these policies, whether climate change is an A1 driver of these fires, or whether it is merely one of many factors in its forest management that is also driving these fires.
Yeah, including multiple decades of letting the forest grow and not having fires. Paul, the Los Alamos fire, one of the worst fires in New Mexico, caused by a control burn. Now the fires up near Las Vegas, certainly a big part of that by control burn. When it comes to forest management, there's a lot of environmental groups that hate chainsaws. They don't like thinning of trees using chainsaws. They don't like logging much of any kind. And, they use those laws to block things. And so the federal government, given the state of the laws and how they act under the rules that are promulgated, really don't have very many tools to manage forest fires. And so one thing about it, when you have a huge fire blow through a place and, kill all the trees, you don't have a forest fire there for some period of time. That seems like a horrendously horrible policy. And at some point, you would think that the environmental groups might come to the table with some more flexibility, or Congress for that matter, to say, hey, we need to do some things differently, and not every time they want to use a chainsaw to cut down one tree, tie them up for 10 or 20 years and have it cost millions of dollars, and do something to actually manage the forests in places like New Mexico. But as I've said before, everyone always talks about this while the fires are burning, and the minute they go out, it just seems like nothing ever happens again. And so we'll see what happens this time. But yet another reminder of the state of forest management in New Mexico. If you think that's ideal, I'd hate to see what you thought was bad.
Yeah, Smokey Bear, a native New Mexican, definitely did not encourage fire as a management tool. Obviously.
And keep in mind, Smokey the actual bear, God love him, is not the problem. But it was the marketing campaign that was built.
Right.
Like, if there's a fire burning anywhere, somebody has done something wrong. And, 50, 60 years of that, and we see what we have. We don't have small fires anymore. We just have huge hot ones. And, boy, the feds have got to do a little better job in doing risk analysis of their control burn policy, because it's like, maybe, and again, after the Los Alamos fire, really, they thought that was going to happen. And then, Paul, I like to get out in the forests of New Mexico myself and go fishing and hiking and do things. And as I was looking at the weather, it was before the fire even started. I was like, wow, the long-term forecast is for a month of dry, windy weather. That was me, I was like, that was on weather.com. I don't know. It was not a secret. Do the federal government employees and the Forest Service not have access to long-term forecasts, or they just say, forget about it. We know better. Well, it'll be okay. Well, it wasn't okay. And again, this is the second time in recent memory that it's not been okay when they've started these control burns.
Well, it's too bad that Channel 13 already hired their replacement for Mark Ron.
Oh, did they? I could be Weatherman Wally.
Weatherman. Well, Wally's a great name for a weatherman. I'm not going to lie. So, all right, we will leave forest management and energy policy, broadly speaking, behind, and only note that May 16th, that is this past Monday, was the expiration date of Governor Lujan Grisham's most recent, I believe, 25th or 26th order, the health order, and she has indeed extended it. I know you all were waiting with bated breath to see if Governor Lujan Grisham continued her health orders. Now, again, I believe that this is 100% a federal funding issue. Maybe not 100%, but 75%, with the other 25 or so percent being, I can keep this in my back pocket. It's easier. It's below the radar screen. Nobody except those crazy people at the Rio Grande Foundation even talk about this on a regular basis when I extend it. But if I let it lapse and then I bring it back, everybody's going to be up in arms and talking about it. So let's just keep extending this thing. And the latest order is now through May 30th. That means 2 weeks from Monday, which also means on Memorial Day, it will be the last day of this latest iteration of the governor's health order. Again,
Unless it is extended again.
I'm quite confident it will be. We'll see if the governor...
So you're predicting yes?
Release, yes.
I'm predicting yes, too. We'll see what happens. So
she takes time out away from her grilling and barbecuing on Memorial Day to make that call, or if we get a few days in advance, whatever. May 30th is the next day. So only 2 weeks this time. I don't know if there is a rhyme or reason to that. It just is. Nobody asked the governor why she extends it in these kind of haphazard ways. But yes, it was renewed on May 16th for 2 weeks.
All right.
And
I feel safe just knowing that.
I know. And that and the triple mask you wear outside every time you go out in the forest. Now, having those masks on in some of the air we've had recently may not be the worst of ideas, but we know that the masks don't necessarily do very well in viruses. You'd have to compare the smoke particles and the viral size and whether they're scooting through those holes in those masks. But the only other thing is that, yes, early voting at your county clerk's office is continuing. That will be changed next week when all the voting convenience centers open up, and I guess early voting will come on in earnest. So important issues to be discussed. Remember, under the new law, if you are an independent and you would like to vote for one of the major party candidates or one of their primary votes, there's primaries up and down the ballot, more or less contested, as we've discussed. Republicans have the governor's race, Congressional District 1, the newly reformed district, and then the Democrats have Attorney General, which is a fairly heated race as well. So if you feel particularly strongly and you're an independent, you can go to the poll and actually request to be registered as a member of the Republican or Democratic Party. And you can do the same, I suppose, for the Libertarian Party, although I don't think they have any primaries in the Libertarian Party. But you can show your support and register. You will be registered for the next election unless you register back. So it's
and 12 of your friends can make such a statement.
It's a goofy process. I don't know that it's going to be a long-term solution for whether we have open or closed primaries. I think we're moving towards more and more open primaries, but how long that takes and whether that's the ultimately a good thing or not is an open question. Anyway, that's where
so just to cut to the chase on that real quickly is you could decide whether you're a Republican or a Democrat based on the primaries that are important to you for that time. And I take it you could probably change back whenever you want. So every primary season you could decide at the polling place what you are. So
yes.
You're not a binary.
You're a trans voter. Yes,
trans voter. You're not binary.
Yeah, and in that case, that's a real thing. I'm not sure. Libertarians are the only third party that currently is a major party. I think that's going to go away in a near future. Finally, at Albuquerque City Council last night, the council approved a budget that will increase spending year over year by 20%. Good old Albuquerque here, no fiscal constraint needed. 5% pay raises for city workers, and a lot of other money flowing in just to the city bureaucracy. Interestingly enough, the mayor had proposed a budget. This one is $15 million higher than the one proposed by Mayor Keller. So city council, unfortunately, the coalition of the sane and the more moderate councilors that we elected in November kind of went a little crazy here. It wasn't that long ago that Councilor Dan Lewis was trying to rescind a portion of the gross receipts tax that Keller pushed through council, 3/8 of a cent increase when he got in 2018. Lewis wanted to rescind 1/8 of that, which would have reduced GRT by about $20 million annually.
And no other counselor really
it was
very interested in
1-8
that
vote, and it really is unfortunate. Now, so the increase of the city council passed budget, toss in free buses, that's another $3 million. You're talking about almost right there enough money to do the gross receipts tax reduction. So, Mayor Keller coming across as the fiscal conservative here in the city of Albuquerque. And look, I get it. Inflation is running rampant. It's harder than ever to find good people to work. But the city of Albuquerque, whether it's the progressives that we just saw go away after the November election in terms of their dominance, or the conservatives, and Lewis and Grout did vote against the revised budget, the big budget that passed. Either way, though, the city of Albuquerque continues to basically have a seafood diet style budgetary perspective. Seafood diet, of course, being if you see food, eat it, and the Albuquerque city government, if you see money, spend it. So no room for tax cuts there.
Yeah, and we're seeing, in the city of Albuquerque, a lot of the same issue that comes up like with the Albuquerque public schools. It's not a question of just how much money is being spent, but what are the services and what is the outcomes that are happening with that? So, I don't think anyone would say, well, at least Albuquerque is a cleaner, safer place to be right now with the extra money being spent.
No, I wouldn't say that the evidence for what we are getting for that money is very, very good or readily available. So, all right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube and Rumble channels. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.